Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and you're listening to my tech podcast. And what I want to talk about today is, first, let's just start off with sort of what's the news in AI. So basically, I'm going to focus this on, since I haven't done an episode in a while, let's just focus on sort of getting everybody sort of caught up on what's kind of going on right now. And essentially right now, the summer's been a sort of surge of just sort of really groundbreaking model releases. It all kind of started off with, sort of like the really big one that kind of kicked everything off was like Fable. Now, the story behind Fable is that Fable is really a version of a model called Mythos from Anthropic. It's essentially the same model. Again, if you're using Fable, if you're using Mythos, you're using the same exact model. The difference is that the Fable name goes through certain guardrails to prevent you from doing certain things with the model. Okay? And this kind of basically Anthropic sort of promoting this whole idea that this model is so powerful and possibly dangerous and things like that ended up backfiring on it, and the government ended up kind of intervening and making them basically restricting their ability to sort of release it for a little bit. If anyone remembers, like, it was released, then it wasn't released, then it was released again, and that was sort of tricky. Okay, so then they finally released it, and their initial goal was just to release it for temporarily, and then basically what would happen as an Anthropic user, you would lose access to Fable, and you would have to use the API to pay per usage of Fable, which would be really, really expensive. Okay, and the idea was that they'd make a whole bunch of money this way. Now, a couple different things sort of changed the calculus here. So the two really big things. One, GPT came out with GPT 5.6, which has 3 versions: Sol, Terra, and Luna. Sol being sort of the Fable level powerful one. And if you use this, it's just part of your membership, your GPT subscription. They're not taking it away. They don't have no intention to taking it away. It's not API only. This kind of put pressure on Anthropic, being like, well, we can't not offer, if they're going to offer that level as part of the subscription, then we have to offer that level as part of the subscription, which is kind of funny because when you take a look at your Anthropic subscription, it's like Fable has a separate quota than the rest of your account, while with GPT, Sol just uses up your existing subscription faster than other models. But GPT 5.6 Sol will use your subscription faster than other models, but it doesn't have like a separate quota per se that's independent of your account level quota. Which is an interesting way of doing things. So Anthropic being Anthropic. But the other big thing that happened was the release of Kimi K3 and GLM 5.2. These were open weight models that offered fairly frontier model type quality of usage. Like basically almost not quite caught up with the Anthropics and the GPTs of the world, but getting there in an open weight way. Again, these are models that are so big that you're not going to run them on your own personal computer. But this means theoretically, like, hey, companies like Amazon or Google and Microsoft could run these models on their own and offer them as an additional service versus you having to kind of get them from their Chinese company counterparts. So you can have multiple providers of these models. There could be competition in the provision of these models. Yes. And that's, to me, a good thing. And I've used Kimi K3 a little bit. I've also been using DeepSeek a lot, DeepSeek 4, because it's like the most affordable model and it's really good for the price. Again, it's not Fable level quality, but for pretty much almost the cost of nothing, like 11 cents for a million tokens, DeepSeek is pretty powerful for a lot of sort of agentic tasks. So this basically puts another wrinkle on. Now, basically, GPT basically offering Sol as part of the subscription put pressure on Anthropic to make sure that they don't make Fable API only. And then the release of GLM and Kimi basically also put price pressure, basically saying, hey, there's a almost just as good quality, open, kind of possibly cheaper version, depends on what you're doing. Because, again, it's not just the price per tokens, it's also the token efficiency. So if you have a model that just wastes a lot of tokens, even though it may be cheaper for those individual tokens, it could still be not cheaper. So Kimi K3, just like if you just took a look at the token price, it looks cheaper. But from my understanding, it's not as token efficient. So based on my understanding of all the coverage I've read and followed, right now, sort of the most efficient of these sort of frontier level models, we're going to get the best bang for your buck. It's going to be sort of the GPT family, which are more token efficient, and overall seems just to have overall positive reviews. I'm not hearing anyone say anything particularly negative about them. Even now, and to respond to all that, Anthropic came out with Opus 5 to sort of be a almost Fable quality model, but at Opus level pricing, which again, before Opus was the expensive model. Now Opus is the cheaper Fable, which is kind of funny when you think about how we've all mentally sort of shifted with the release of Fable. And Opus started off with some pretty positive responses, and now I'm starting to see a lot of people souring on it. I mean, from my understanding of it, is that Opus 5 is quite different in the sense that if you prompt it the way you've been prompting it, like, it actually benefits from you from not giving it as much detail about all sorts of different things, because it's going to kind of figure it out on its own, or it's more apt to go ask you questions and do validate its own work. So in that case, giving it instructions to validate makes it validate things twice. And there's other issues where basically the kind of more deterministic prompting that has become the norm, where you're kind of really describing what's going on, and then now you're starting to see this move into sort of loops in graph engineering, which again, loops is just basically saying, hey, do this task. This is what this task looks like if it's done right. So when you do it, check if you did it right, and then if you didn't do it right, do it again, and then just keep looping until you've met all the requirements. Okay, and then now now for the problems for really large tasks, that could result in lots of iteration. So now people are moving towards graphs where you're creating sort of chains of loops. So instead of creating one loop for an entire task, you're breaking that loop into a bunch of parallel and subsequent or cumulative tasks, each being their own loop. So you're creating like sort of a graph of loops, not a DAG, because they can be circular parts. What a DAG is a directed acyclical graph, which means the nodes always move in one direction. So you're never going to end up back at a previous node, because you always end up working towards the end. While just a graph can have parts where, hey, you do this task and then you end up back at a previous task again. It just depends on what you're trying to design here. So that's sort of the big thing. And then I've been writing a bunch of materials on graphs. Not on graphs, but on graphs, on loops, on AI development in general. So you'll be seeing some of that come out. I've also been writing productivity guides. So I wrote a book on productivity for each of the major AI model families, which you can find on Amazon. So if you know someone who hasn't really fully embraced AI and could use a book that kind of helps them get started with whatever they have at work or just their personal Google account, check out those books. books.alexmerced.com. So that's what's kind of going on in the AI space. You have this whole sort of model war. I mean, you still have battles between harnesses. And actually, the one thing I did not mention is Grok. Grok came out with a new I mean, not only did Grok buy Cursor, and Composer has become a pretty good model for agentic coding, but then Grok came out with a new version of Grok, which was, frontier level quality. Again, not quite as smart as like a Fable or a Soul, but a lot better in price, in efficiency. So again, giving you this really strong alternative to use if you don't want to spend the money that you would with GPT and Anthropic. So that was also a really big development. So again, you're getting all this competitive pressure from all sorts of angles, whether it's again U.S. models with Grok, and then the European models are starting to like do some cooking in there. Nothing sort of immediate to sort of really announce there, but again, there's work being done there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing the European models make some sort of leap in the future at some point. But then again, the Asian models, just because it's more of an unrestricted development, have really, really, really grown. And people keep accusing them that it's purely distillation. And, distillation can help you catch up a model to other models. Like, it'll help you get your model from, like, nothing to almost a fraction as good as the model you're distilling. Because, again, what distillation is you, instead of training your AI on data, like, actually, here's a good analogy I like to use. Imagine that I learn how to do math. I learn the hard way how to figure out 2 plus 2, 2 plus 5, 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus 3 is 5. I learn that and I understand it. Great. So now I can do math. Okay. But what if you just watch me answer the question? If you hear me say, someone ask me 2 plus 2, what's that? And I go 4. You can now answer that question too. Someone says to you 2 plus 2 equals, you can say 4, and you will be right. You will be just as right as I was. But what you're doing is you're imitating sort of the how I answer questions versus actually understanding what I'm doing. I mean, this is essentially what distillation is. So again, you can get a lot of similar outputs by mimicking the outputs of another model, another more intelligent model, through being trained on its question and responses. Like, hey, here's the questions was asked and here's the responses to those questions. Now you understand sort of like, hey, when people ask stuff like this is generally how you should answer it. That's distillation. And that can be a shortcut to improving the intelligence of a model. But there's a lot more going on with a lot of these. And then again, as far as like when certain models were released and whatnot, a lot of these distillation accusations are oftentimes overstated. As far as, again, what kind of improvements you can get from distillation and whether they distill from models like Fable, whether they even had the time to between like a release of a Kimi K3 or a GLM. But there are lots of other really cool things going on. I mean, there's like the whole sort of mixture of experts approach, where basically instead of having to activate every parameter of a model, you activate groups of parameters of models based on sort of like what kind of questions being asked. So you have, and each group of parameters represent a different expert. And there's a lot of these other types of interesting approaches to how you design your models that are allowing these models to be able to run on cheaper hardware or less powerful hardware, and be able to have more powerful intelligence at a fraction of a cost. And again, these competitive pressures are coming from all angles, and it's really interesting to kind of see how quickly this is all advancing because of those competitive pressures. So when I hear about like people pushing toward, like particularly Anthropic, pushing towards trying to control open models, and they're not saying, oh, ban all open models. They're trying to make it sound like, hey, okay, no, we're not saying ban. Only ban the ones that we're worried about, which are the more, again, Fable-like models. They're saying, hey, we only want the more, they're saying doing it out of safety. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, like, the cat's out of the bag. It's what's done is done. I mean, like, at the end of the day, even if you were to put legal restrictions on current sort of frontier models, you already have certain open models that exist that people can secretly fine-tune and train to higher quality, and I'm sure governments all around the world are already working on that, and have already done that. So really all you're doing is you're saying, okay, consumers shouldn't have this level of power unless they pay Anthropic for it, is basically what it comes down to. And they're saying, well, it's okay to pay Anthropic for it because we'll put guardrails on it. But again, it's so, the cat's out of the bag. Like, at the end of the day, like, the models exist, the models are out there, people can train additional models on them. How do you enforce such controls? It's really not very transparent. Rent seeking, at the end of the day, rent seeking being the idea that the companies try to cozy up the government to get controls on their competition, or at least controls on their competition is one kind of rent that they can seek from government in order to improve sort of their business standing. So it is what it is. But yeah, I play a little bit with everything. I just love seeing the technology out work. So that's the AI piece. Let's talk a little bit about the data lakehouse piece. And bottom line is, like, the data lakehouse has matured as far as like it's the ability to create a data warehouse on top of your object storage that is interoperable between all the different tools that you use. Like, that's pretty figured out. Like, the main things that need to be figured out are just sort of how do you do this with lower latency for like streaming use cases, which is a huge push within the V4 discussions of Apache Iceberg, and just making sure that catalogs can capture not only just your Iceberg tables but everything else. And there's a lot of work in the Polaris community regarding that. And then the newest Apache project, Apache Aussie, which used to be referred to as Open Semantic Exchange, which was basically what it is that instead of saying everybody has to represent semantic information the same way within their products, is creating sort of a a standard way of expressing semantic information to switch it. So essentially what you're doing is you're creating a universal intermediate format or intermediate expression for semantic information, which means meaning around your data. Okay, so that way AI can discover the meaning around your data, but again, different tools will expect that data, that semantic data to be represented differently. So OSI is going to basically be sort of like this universal converter in a sense, similar to what Xtable did for table formats. Except that like it's more likely that people standardize on a table format than they standardize on a way of expressing semantic information, just because of the differences in the way data works in different platforms. So basically what this does, it just creates a standard way to convert between. So I can say, hey, I have my semantic layer in, let's say, Dremio, but I have an agent in Snowflake that needs to be able to use that semantic layer. That semantic data can then convert into this OSI intermediate format and then reconvert into a way that Snowflake understands it. So that way that agent can then take advantage of it. And that's a sort of a new project, really early stages. So basically right now it's all about trying to get different people on board to create converters, standardizing that intermediate format, and then creating the converters around that intermediate format. So if you don't already follow my weekly Lakehouse newsletter, please follow me on Substack. So that way you get that newsletter every week, where I summarize all the updates with all these different open source projects like Arrow, Iceberg, whatnot. But the other big development is just like the race to do it all, in a sense. Basically, well, a lot of companies are going to build their own separate platforms for analytics and operations. So, they're not going all in on one sort of platform, one vendor. There are going to be companies that want to do that. There are going to be companies that it would just be easier if everything is sort of integrated top to bottom. Okay, and that's where you're starting to see all the companies kind of go to. So the last year, you kind of saw Snowflake and Databricks kind of moving that direction with their purchases of different Postgres companies and really kind of moving into sort of the application space. So that, and this benefits a couple different things. One is that if your platform hosts all the operational applications and the analytical use cases, then you're going to have a much clearer picture for agents. Okay, agents can then be able to operate on enterprise-wide understanding much better because it can see everything, because it has access to everything. And then in the sort of the opposite direction, you have a company that's typically its strong suit has been the operational. So with Databricks and stuff like, there are companies that were strong on the data platform side, trying to start moving it towards the operational application side. While, again, full disclosure, I work for a company called Dremio. Dremio has been acquired by SAP. So technically SAP is my employer's parent company. So full disclosure. Okay. And again, I don't really know anything about anything at the moment. But bottom line is, basically based on that acquisition and the acquisition of Prior Labs, which is basically a European AI research institute that's creating tabular models. So again, these are not models that think in text, but they think in tabular data. So these are going to be AI models that basically think natively in tables versus just you passing in a tabular data as just a blotch of text in a prompt. When you're doing RAG, you're going to have models that kind of think that way naturally. How does that all fit into the big picture? Again, these are things to be seen. I'm not on the engineering side or the product side, so not my area. But you have that, and then they also brought Reltio, which is basically a master data management. So this is the idea is that, hey, I have data in a bunch of places. I'm not looking to federate queries. What I'm looking to is to define sort of what is the gold version of a particular thing. Like what is the gold customer record? Based on all this data, how do you calculate a customer record? Okay, so between Reltio and Dremio, you have this ability to federate your data from lots of different places, and really leverage an Iceberg Lakehouse. With Reltio, you have the ability to kind of define, what are the sort of canonical versions of certain things, and then Dremio has its own semantic layer built in. So you have all these nice pieces that will allow SAP, up on top of its existing business data cloud, which includes things like SAP HANA and whatnot, to build a stronger data platform for its customers who typically, again, are using SAP for their operational applications. Like I remember before I wasn't even in tech, using Ariba to send invoices to a particular customer, a banking customer. So things like that. So bottom line is you have this sort of movement towards saying, hey, you can, because you have the open Lakehouse, you don't have to use anything in particular. Again, everyone's going to allow you to federate whatever data platform you have because of the Lakehouse wherever. But if you want a all sort of inclusive end-to-end thing, a thing that basically houses all of that and provides you the agentic wrapper of all of that, you're seeing these three companies kind of, particularly again, SAP, Databricks, and Snowflake, and probably we can include IBM in that with their acquisition of Confluent, trying to create these sort of enterprise-wide wrappers to run the data story across an enterprise with an agentic wrapper on top of it. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on to be paying attention to, sort of like what's going on the enterprise data and AI space. I'm really excited to sort of learn more and get involved more in that. So I've definitely been involved in the data lakehouse space. Again, with everything that's going on, we'll see. We'll see where my role gets to be in sort of seeing the future of enterprise data and AI, which is going to be cool and exciting. Again, so that's the deal there. So again, if you've been following, you want to continue following all this stuff. Again, I not stop putting out my weekly newsletter. So the best way to make sure you're getting consistent updates from me is to follow me on LinkedIn or to subscribe to my Substack. So that way you get my weekly newsletter. I have a weekly newsletter on AI. I'm talking about model releases, what's going on with semiconductors, things like that. And then a weekly newsletter on all the different open source technologies around the Lakehouse, Apache Iceberg, Apache Arrow, etc. So you get a good shot in the arm as far as what's going on in the world without having to go hunt around for it every week. So I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.